Welcome back to the 2 Months Hockey Podcast presented by Kentwood Ford here in Alberta. I am your host, Joshua Marshall, and we have a great guest joining us early this morning here on Friday. We have Darren Dreger from TSN Hockey and the Ran Jags Hockey Podcast. Dregs, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing okay, man. How are you? Just kind of gearing up, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's you get through the trade deadline of March 7th, and as Bob McKenzie used to refer to the rest of March as mail it in March. It didn't feel like we were able to entirely mail it in because of all the stories that we were following and whatnot.
yeah, no, for
So
sure.
it's been a busy run, and here we are on the cusp of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So it's exciting.
Yeah, there's a lot of great storylines going in, and we'll start off with the Winnipeg Jets because I think I listened to Ryan Dregs last week or the week before that is a series that you'll be covering with TSN, and that big win last night over the Dallas Stars and a convincing win, and not shocking, they're just continuing to roll the way they are.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on Winnipeg and what Cheveldayoff and the coaching staff of there have done this year in terms of getting the most out of everyone that you see, and obviously the success of Cole Perfetti too.
Right. Well, all of that kind of winds into where I'm gonna start. And that's with the promotion of Scott Arniel as head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. He has a high level of coaching experience and was an NHL head coach. So the position wasn't foreign to him when he accepted that role as head coach of the Jets. But having the opportunity and the time that he had to work with Rick Bowness, I'm sure that there were parts of Bowness's approach, be it from a defensive perspective, whatever, that Scott Arniel appreciated and kind of stole. And so all around, that made him better prepared to take on the full responsibility of the job. But when Bonus was away and dealing with a family matter and his wife's illness, Arniel took over from that point. And I think that he got to know Cole Perfetti as an example, some of the younger guys really well. And so there was a connection between Scott Arniel at that point and certainly Cole Perfetti and some of the other pieces in Winnipeg. That is, I think, benefited and transitioned over to where the Winnipeg Jets are at the start of the season, midpoint, and where they are right now. So you look at the numbers and the game of Cole Perfetti and how it has evolved. Well, it's evolved because of the trust that Scott Arniel has in Perfetti, right from the drop of the puck start of the season. And don't forget, of course, there was a bit of a wasn't ugly, but it was a tough negotiation to get that bridge deal finalized between Perfetti and the Jets. So there's pressure on Cole, as soon as he comes back into the mix. All right, well, I better get going here because I want to make sure that I'm in a better position, in my third contract. I think he's been terrific. I think that his game has evolved. We're seeing a physical element to it now. And that really, uh,
It's been good for them.
sorry, Josh,
Yeah, no,
really
no worries.
bolsters. I'm constantly battling a cold. Um, but when you've got a younger push like that, then you don't always have to lean on the obvious guys like the shelf Shifley, Kyle Connor, Nick Ehlers is back into the mix. I mean, they've just got layer after layer after layer, and that's up front. And then you look at what they've got on defense. The ads that they brought in, at the trade deadline in Luke Shen, who's thrilled to get to Winnipeg, and obviously Tanev, who adds a different element up front, and Connor Hellebuck. So there just doesn't seem to be an area of weakness. Sure, Cheveldayoff looked for a number two center. That was his priority going into the trade deadline, but that's more of an area of want than an absolute need or a hole in the lineup, right? But that's a tough conference, and as good as this year has been, man, they better have their best to come because they're going to need it to get to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, and then they got the tests that they'll have. Will obviously be good for them in terms of getting over any kind of hurdle. But it's not like that much of a hurdle they have to get over. I know that it wasn't the greatest first round that they had last year, but in terms of showing that poise and determination to get through, and they're a mature team, so they're gonna be a fun to watch. That's
Yeah,
series
agreed.
wherever they are in that aspect, and they're And again, Arniel's done a hell of a job. We'll
Hmm.
move over to the Oilers here. A lot is made of some of the injuries and when this roster will look fully healthy, and that could come as soon as Game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs versus the LA Kings. I thought it was interesting. PK Subban on ESPN last night was kind of taking a shot at the Oilers and hoping that the Kings beat them, and teaching the Oilers a lesson for letting Holloway and Broberg go. Steve Levy was kind of joking around like, "Oh, I didn't see that comment coming," but it obviously is going to look like a fourth year in a row. This matchup
Yeah.
between them. Opposite thing is the Kings will have home ice. It's looking like. What's your thoughts on this series, and then what the Oilers could look like come Game 1 of the playoffs in terms of all the injuries that they have and
Yeah.
where there that sits?
Well, I mean, if we start with the injuries for the Oilers, the expectation is they're going to be healthy. So it depends on who we're talking about here. I mean, I'd put a big question mark beside Trent Frederick. We know with the high ankle sprain that stuff takes a long time. And then we look back to last weekend. Sure, he gave it a valiant attempt, but it was painful to watch because the kid so desperately wanted to stay in the game. He just wasn't physically able to, right? So it's impossible, Josh, to say that he's going to be ready for Game 1. The hope is that he's ready. And with that type of injury, you know, one day can make a big difference. So, let's start there. But then you look at some of the other guys. Ekholm, of course, will be ready. Go down the list, and the one that jumps off the page for me is Evander Kane, and only because, and I'm sure you've talked about it in that market. Evander Kane is now, let's call him an older player. He's a big body guy. If he can skate, if he can get going out there, then sure, he can be an influential piece. He can definitely make a difference for the Edmonton Oilers. If he's not ready physically and he's playing, well, then that becomes a bigger problem, right? So, I mean, the expectation is that they'll have a full complement, however that looks. So, I don't really see injury as taking a toll. We know the Los Angeles Kings are deeper and they're better. I would have been one to question their goaltending, but Darcy Kemper has been terrific for the Los Angeles Kings. And who would have thought that when they made the trade, right, with the Washington Capitals? I mean, really, it was two difficult pieces in Kemper coming out of Washington and Pierre-Luc Dubois going from LA to the Washington Capitals. But that team is built for the playoffs now. Some question around the health, of course, of Drew Doughty. Again, another impactful piece. Some of the prognosticators are picking LA to beat Edmonton. I'm not bold enough to say that yet because of the experience the Oilers earned. Getting to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, and Josh, just based on the way some of the secondary pieces have performed during this stretch of injury that the Oilers have been dealing with, is encouraging. I mean, Connor Brown scores two big goals the other night as McDavid comes back from missing 8 games because of injury. Victor Arvidsson all of a sudden has a bit of scoring pop in him. Jeff Skinner, to be fair, I didn't expect him to produce the way that he has this year. And he's got some defensive liabilities, but those are the pieces to go deep into the playoffs again that have to be contributing assets. They have to be. They can't be sporadic, and nor do they have to be, game in and game out offensive contributors, but they've got to be threatening and they've got to be pieces that you can rely on. So it's a pick'em series for me.
Yeah.
It is. It's a pick'em series going in. And if I had to place a bet today, I'd give the Oil the benefit of the doubt. Just the experience factor of getting to Game 7.
Yeah, it's usually pretty hard to beat a team 4 years in a row, but it has happened, and it's the opportunity to be there. Maybe the biggest thing for the Oilers question mark is in goal, but
Yeah.
this reset for Skinner's been good. And you talked about Skinner; he's never played in a playoff game yet, and Jeff Skinner. So I think that player will be excited to be a
He
part
better
of
be.
that.
Yeah.
Exactly, and everyone knows how it is in this market. Just one more on Kane. There's a lot of fan questions coming in, just in terms of. We've seen what Gabriel Landeskog has done here in terms of going down for a conditioning stint. Is that the same option for Kane? Have you heard or know anything on that front for him?
No, I have not.
I know he just had a kid yesterday. There's
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a lot of factors that go into that. So I'm not going to sit here and say, no, it's
yeah,
not going to happen.
yeah,
I mean, if he's that close and feels healthy enough and is willing to accept that conditioning loan, then that's a pretty good indication, a good sign for both Evander Kane and the Edmonton Oilers that he's ready.
yeah,
He's ready to flip the switch and get going. But in his mind, because he's been skating for a long time, Josh, right? It's
yeah.
not like, he's kind of been sitting around just, riding a bike or trying to stay, as well conditioned as he can. No, he's been going for a bit here. So maybe in his mind, he doesn't feel like he needs that conditioning stint. Maybe he feels like he needs a game or two, some practice time, and away he goes.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move over to the Canucks real quick. Obviously, not going to make the playoffs. Quinn Hughes yesterday, he came out glowingly a report of how much him and Rick Tocchet get along. We'll see what happens with Brock Besser, but what do you think happens with the Canucks in this offseason? I know they wanted to get Pedersen in Vancouver to train this summer too, so there's a lot of moving parts in there. But where are you at with the Canucks and Tocchet, and so maybe some of the roster moves that could happen this summer?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's going to be ample change, right? So if we start with the head coach, I think what happens here is they get to the end of the year. I know that Vancouver wants to extend Rick Tocchet, and we're willing to give him a healthy extension. So that's not the issue. The issue is, for a myriad of reasons, is Rick Tocchet willing to commit longer term to the Vancouver. And until you get to that place, which is the end of the year, I don't, he's not able to answer that. All of his focus to this point, until very recently, has been consumed by the quest to try and will this team into the playoff spot. Well, it's not going to happen. We know that now. So has he had enough time to digest and go, yeah, you know what? I feel like there's still a lot more I can do here. I don't know that. I wouldn't be surprised if he wants to take a little bit of time. Now, keep in mind the Canucks do possess a club option, so they could make a couple of choices here. One, they could say we're going to execute that club option, and we'll roll the dice, and we'll go into next year with a lame duck coach. Now, Tocchet might say, "Well, I'm not doing that," and they make a decision to either fire or seek some sort of discipline action, which I don't think they would do. Um, or they give him the time. They give him the time. So there's a lot of uncertainty around the coaching staff of the Vancouver Canucks. So then you look at the needs, and they've got some pressing areas here. I think they're going all in to acquire a number two center. Do they do that in free agency? To be fair, there's not a whole lot that's coming open to the market. You do have some interesting pieces. Is Matt Duchene going to get there with Dallas? Does Dallas find a way to re-sign him? You've got Sam Bennett with the Florida Panthers. I mean, go down the list. There's some interesting guys like Brock Nelson. Most believe that in some way, shape, or form, he'll make his way to Minnesota. That might be his preference. But the Canucks have an abundance of resources to use, capital, draft capital. They've got that. They've got a prospect pool that they're not afraid to dip into via trade, for that number two center. The biggest question for me in Vancouver is Thatcher Demko. So he's got 1 year remaining on his contract. What do they do there? Well, again, their preference is to extend him, but I don't think they want to throw out a long-term extension. Maybe a 3-4 year deal, right? Well, is that enough to keep Thatcher Demko in the mix? Again, they can't really negotiate. Well, they can't negotiate with him until July 1st, but he may want all the money right now in a mega extension. And if Vancouver doesn't have the appetite to do that, then Demko might just say, okay, well, then I'm not going to sign. So if you want to roll the dice on whether I have a change of mind, that's up to you. But I'm prepared to go into the final year of my contract and then look at free agency. So those really are the three main areas, I think, of focus for Patrick Allvin and the Canucks.
And there's a lot of time to make those decisions as well too. So we'll see how that goes in that market. Big game
Yeah.
tonight in Calgary. Drags, Minnesota Wild in town, 8 o'clock puck drop, and it is going to be probably a lively barn at the
Oh
Saddle
boy.
Dome. A must win for them. The chase is the hopes are kind of dwindling as they go here. Just a tough loss in Anaheim the other night, losing that point. But what's your thoughts on, I guess, in the whole of what Huska's been able to do, Conroy's been able to do in this group, and do you have some still belief that this they can get in, or is it pretty hard right now?
Yeah, not pretty hard, near impossible to be
Yeah.
fair. That's the way I look at it. I don't think that we're going to see much change, in that wild card spot in the West. A valiant effort by the Calgary Flames. And I'm sure they're going to look back, when it becomes reality and mathematically they're out at certain stretches over the course of the year where they dropped a game here or went through 2 or 3 or 4 games where, they didn't get the points that they needed. But I don't think that they're going to dwell too much on the negative. I think that they're going to look at the upside. I mean, there was a lot of upheaval around this team, right? Significant change. Did we know that Dustin Wolf was going to be as good as he's been this year? And the answer to that is no. Highly touted, of course, but when you trade Jacob Markstrom and you're putting all your eggs in that basket of a rookie goaltender at the NHL level, that's a tall ask. That were they sure that Jonathan Huberdeau was going to have a renaissance season? No, couldn't be sure of that, but there he is. And then you've got Nazem Kadri and all of the older pieces that clearly bought into the messaging of Ryan Huska and the staff there and blocked out all the nonsense of, oh, this team is headed in an our sort of direction, a renovation, a retool, maybe even a rebuild. Now, they didn't buy that for a second. And then they've got some younger pieces that, Calgary has been careful in developing that got opportunity and proved that they're also NHL ready. I think that Craig Conroy, Josh, potentially is going to be one of the more active NHL general managers in the offseason. And, this time of year, offer sheets are always that sexy topic. When you look at some of the restricted free agents around the league and the possibility, and then, you bring it back to the reality of what happened in Edmonton last year with Broberg and Holloway going to St. Louis. And, that's what makes it a relevant conversation. But I think like Conroy is an example of a general manager who has definitely tried to be aggressive on the trade front. He pulled off that trade with the Philadelphia Flyers, acquiring Frost and Farabee, was constantly having conversation with Kevin Adams in Buffalo about Dylan Cousins, and just, obviously couldn't get it to work. Dylan Cousins ends up in Ottawa. So could Conroy be a guy that, looks at that offer sheet path, and who might he be focusing on, right? So I think it's going to be a real cool year for the Calgary Flames this offseason. I do.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what's going through this year will help them going years forward in terms of just that maturity part of learning how to win and getting this close. So I agree there. We'll see what happens down the stretch here. Not a lot of hockey left, and it's hard to make up 5 points in January, let alone the last week of the season.
Agreed.
So
Yeah.
it's going to be tough. Get your thoughts on what a good friend of yours, Dave Poulin, and obviously Steve Staios have done in Ottawa. They made the playoffs. It'll be great to see playoff hockey back in the nation's
Yeah.
capital. What's your thoughts on what they've been able to do in that group as well?
Well, they've done a masterful job of surrounding their young core of talent. That's what they've done there. And there's always speculation around the future of Brady Tkachuk, obviously the captain of the Ottawa Senators, and whether he's going to stay long term and all of that. I mean, he still has a hefty contract, so it's not like he's going anywhere anytime soon. But the messaging that I get out of Ottawa is that Brady has been and will be the focal point. So let's make sure that we surround him with all the pieces that are needed to be a top contending team. And that's what Steve Staios and company did and have done in Ottawa. And you look at arguably the two most significant ads, Linus Ullmark being one during the Stanley Cup final last year. We, again, read and were part of the speculation, weren't convinced that they were going to be able to execute it the way that they did, and yet they did. And Linus Ullmark in the second half of the season, coming out of the Four Nations, has been lights out good. And then, the Dylan Cousins trade, which I alluded to earlier, yeah, they gave up some good pieces, Josh Norris included, but Dylan Cousins was ripe. Like he was ready for a change of scenery. And now we're seeing the player in Ottawa that Buffalo was hoping was going to emerge on a consistent basis. And that's just a couple of the moves that Staios has made. You can go down the list when you look at that roster. I see Nick Cousins is back into the fold. I mean, that's going to feel like a major trade, Josh, when this guy is good to go. David Perron missed a tremendous amount, for injury reasons, family reasons, all of that. Don't underestimate the presence of Perron and what he provides on and off the ice, again, to Brady Tkachuk and that younger group. So, you know, we're not certain yet who Ottawa is going to match up against in the Stanley Cup final, or hold on a sec, in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But I could definitely see the Ottawa Senators going deeper than some people would expect. Yeah, they're new to the playoff run. They're new, but the way this team is built and the way that they play under Travis Green, who I didn't overlook, this guy's a hell of a coach. They're the complete package. They are may not quite be ready. They're still a little green in certain areas, but I wouldn't be surprised if they win a couple of rounds.
Yeah, yeah. What a coach Greener is, and great to see him back. And he is a friend of your Ray and Drake's podcast as well too. So some great interviews he's done there. Two more before we get you out. The Habs have done a great job here and coming out of the Four Nations in a positive the maturity level with St. Louis and Kent Hughes have done in terms of putting a good roster together. But it's the work that the players are doing on the ice too, and it's a mix of young and old dregs.
Yeah, it is. Um, the Montreal Canadiens have just methodically embraced the rebuild, and they've stayed to script. Sure, they've added some pieces, Carrier around the midpoint in the trade with Nashville, which doesn't get enough credit, to be fair. I think of Patrick Laine. I didn't think that Patrick Laine would step into the Montreal Canadiens lineup and be as good as he's been. A lot of that's power play, which they expected coming in. But the adversity that he faced with the injury, and then he comes back, it's almost like he's feeding off the energy of that market, right? So, there were some things that have been done that were a bit unexpected, but they really haven't gone after their youth or chased anything flashy because of the success story that they are this year. No, I mean they stayed true to that script. So it's cool that they've it looks like they're going to lock down a playoff spot. As we're having the conversation, it's still a bit open, right? Similar to Calgary, I guess. But in this case, it looks like Montreal is going to lock that down. Now you've got Ivan Demidov coming into the equation. So I don't know if you were following the live stream.
Oh, I was going to get to it. I saw your tweet underneath it. So
wow. I mean, I love the excitement level around this kid. I do. And I know he's a top prospect, and I do expect that he's going to be a real good NHL player, but he's 19 years old. Yeah. And this team has done really good things this year. So let's just allow this kid to breathe a little bit. I get the hype around him. I understand it. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, Canadiens fans are just looking for another injection. They've got a ton to cheer about, but they just want a bit more, and they're going to get that in Demidov. But I'm going to manage my expectations of what this young man is going to be able to do. The Continental Hockey League, Josh, as you know, is not the NHL. They don't have the same level of pace. They don't have the same level of physicality, the same level of defensive structure and all of that. Coaching. So, all of it, so I think there's potential of Demidov having some influence and impact. I often use those words individually. But I also look around that Montreal dressing room and I see how careful they were with Slafkovsky and some of the other younger talent that are now bona fide NHL difference makers. Well, it takes time to get to that place, but it's still a fun story. And again, the hype train is just amped up in Montreal. So we'll see. I mean, the talk is that he could play as early as Monday against the Chicago Blackhawks. And, jerseys are I think they're sold out of Demidov sweaters. It sounds like they're ratcheting up ticket prices. That for sure will be a sellout. So, I mean, just go down the list. But it all does kind of get put into one pot, beginning to end, of the Montreal Canadiens having what is close to being a dream season. You know, they knew that they had to nibble around the playoffs, but to lock down the playoffs and then to get the added bonus of, this top kid pick in one of the top picks, fifth overall, in Demidov coming over and under contract. It's been a heck of a ride in Montreal.
Yeah, it's fun to see. It's a fun to see the thing. All right, let's finish up on the Leafs this real quick, and Berube's done a really good job here with this
Yeah.
team, and I think the moves that Tree made at the deadline have helped them out, and it looks like the Carlo and Riley pairing looks good. We'll see
Yeah.
the health of some other players in camp and McCabe and whatnot. But your thoughts on the Leafs and how important some success here in the first round of the playoffs and further on is for the future of some of the players too.
Well, I would say it's crucial, right? I mean, they can't be a one and done. That can't happen, or you are going to see some changes here. Now you'll see roster change. Could you see something beyond that? Maybe. I doubt it. I mean, Brad Treliving has done a real nice job. Craig Berube is a decorated NHL coach. Those men aren't going anywhere. And I mean, in fairness, Treliving's fingerprints are now on the Toronto Maple Leafs, but it took a while to get there, so he's got more work to do, and he's going to do that in the offseason. But look at what that offseason is, Josh. It starts with Mitch Marner.
Yep.
If Marner walks to free agency, there's nothing you can do about that. So you take the money that you were, ready to invest in Marner at $13+ million per year, and you spend it on somebody else. And chances are that's a couple of players, right? Is it Sam Bennett? If you can get him as a free agent, maybe. And maybe whatever Bennett gets, you slide over into John Tavares and you re-up him. The cap is going up. And then on top of that, you've got to wrestle with Matthew Knies. And, Matthew Knies is a restricted free agent. He's staying in Toronto. He will be a Maple Leaf next year. We talked about this a little bit earlier. I get the offer sheet speculation around him and around other players in the NHL, but come on. I mean, the Maple Leafs, they're going to match if there is an offer sheet. And first of all, Knies would have to sign that offer sheet. I mean, it's a complex process, which now brings us to the here and now. That's actually looking into the future. This week, I think, provided a good cross section of where Toronto is. They more or less laid an egg on Tuesday on TSN against Florida in Sunrise. Didn't play well. And I don't know what it is about the Florida Panthers. Toronto just kind of crawls into a hole when they play Florida. There were stretches of that game where the Panthers were dominant, absolutely dominant.
Oh, yeah.
And even Matthew Knies talked about they played soft that night. Well, Wednesday isn't a pushover game in Tampa Bay, but Toronto is lights out good. And Matthew Knies, probably didn't want to use the word he used. Soft is a tough word in the National Hockey League, but he used it Tuesday night to describe his team. And then he bounces back with the big boys, Matthews and Marner, and has the hat trick, right? So if Toronto can play the game that they played Wednesday against Tampa Bay, and they're going to have to play that in every series that they play, then I'm comfortable in saying they're a top contender. I think their goaltending is good enough. You talked about Carlo. I think that he's stabilized Morgan Riley, made Morgan Riley better. So they're going to get healthy in the near future here. They have the pieces to be a top contending team in the East. They absolutely do. If they play the way they played Wednesday, then yep, they'll win the first round, might get to the Eastern Conference Final. If they play the way they did against Florida on Tuesday, then there's disappointment and change coming.
Yeah, it'll be a fun thing to see, and to kind of go back earlier in the pod in terms of some of the players we've seen go back to markets. It's cool to see Kemper back in LA. It's cool to see Lars Eller back in Washington and Tanev back in Winnipeg. So maybe this is somewhat of a trend in the National Hockey League at times, because it is somewhat of a copycat.
Yeah,
but it's in terms of saying that, it's the success that they brought going back to the team that they were originally with at times. So
yeah.
It'll be a fun playoffs, Dregs. It'll be a fun last couple days before the regular season ends into the playoffs. And all the best in the playoffs. We'll catch up with you sometime in the playoffs, but all the best and enjoy. And we
Yeah.
love those the meat cooker that you keep throwing out there on social media. So,
Oh, hold on. It's not just the smoker and the barbecue, buddy. I just bought a new meat slicer about 2, 3 weeks ago. Oh, fabulous.
it looked
You
good
know,
with
the
the turkey.
smoked turkey comes off a Pit Boss. You let it cool down overnight, and then you just make beautiful, thinly shaved turkey slices. Doesn't get any better.
No, it sure doesn't. Well, enjoy, Dregs. We'll catch up with you soon. Thanks again.
All right, Josh, thank you.